Okay, so today we're going to sew a pair of PJs. I'm going to start out with my front. I've also got my pocket pieces. On the front, when you get to the side seam, right here is my side seam, you'll have a little notch up here, and you're going to have a notch down here as well. You'll have a corresponding notch on your pockets. One down here. You might not be able to see that notch. Maybe you can see it there. There's a little niche right there. And then one up at the top. And the one up at the top, on your pattern piece, it might not be extremely evident, but it's right where the seam allowance happens. And our seam allowance is at 1/2 inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top, I'm going to take the pocket that corresponds with it, and they're going to go right sides together. I'm going to match up the notch at the top. I'm going to match up the notch at the bottom. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew a box that starts here. I'm going to backstitch. The fabric's going to be going in perpendicular to the foot. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a little backstitch and come out 1/2 inch, maybe a stitch further, but no further than that. And then I'm going to leave the needle down right at that corner, and I'm going to pivot and sew at 1/2 inch or a thread's width more than 1/2 inch all the way up until my other notch. And then I'm going to leave the needle down, pivot, and sew over to the edge and do a little back stitch. That's going to create a little box. My thread stitch length is about a 2.5 or a 2. If you need to use the hand wheel to make sure you don't go too far, which is crucial that you don't go too far, then go ahead and use the hand wheel. Pinning it in place might be a good idea, but at least for sure know where your notches are. Sewing along. And when I get to my upper notch, I'm going to leave the needle down. And I used my hand wheel to get that there. Pivot, and then sew to the edge, and do a back stitch. And then I'm going to clip my threads. Just clip your threads as you go. It makes life nice and easy. So I have a box that looks like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some scissors, just some little ones will do fine, or your big ones, whatever. I'm going to cut a diagonal line from within the box straight to the corner. And I'm going to go to, but not through that corner. But you have to go to. If you back off, even by an 1/8 of an inch, or even a 1/16 of an inch, it can cause you grief later. So make sure that you're clipping all the way to that corner. Once you've clipped all the way to the corner, we're going to leave the seam allowances laying flat here off to the side. And I'm going to open this pocket up. And then I'm going to understitch. And I'm going to start understitching right here. So you can see I can pull that bottom part of the pocket up. I'm going to go from the notch up to the other notch right here. I'm not going to start too low, and I'm not going to go too high. It needs to be exactly within the same space that I just sewed. I'm going to keep that nice, and I'm going to have a little bit of tension on the fabric. You could go and press it right now, but if you feel confident about your ability to just hold it, do a little tiny back stitch, and then I'm sewing at a 1/16 of an inch on the pocket, and it's holding the pocket and all of this seam allowance together. This is called understitching. Find it everywhere in your clothing. You may not realize it, but it's there. And it is a crucial, crucial step. Trim my threads. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over, so you can see that. But I'm going to grab my other pocket. So here's my other pocket. And I'm going to layer this on top of my other pocket and line up all of those curves. Now, when you pull back this top edge up here, when you pull back this top edge, you'll notice it's folded back. My one seam allowance is folded back. You don't want it to fold back, so let it open up. You want that raw corner to match up right there. So you're going to need to pull all of the pant back out of the way so that this raw corner can line up there. And then we're going to start, go ahead and pin all you want right here, but we're going to start sewing right there. I've got 1/2 inch seam allowance there. I'm going to start sewing there, and we're going to sew all the way around the pocket to get them to stick together. As you come around, you're going to make sure that the bottom is also lined up. If you pin, you would have already looked at that. Nice and even all the way around the edge. Trim my threads. And now I'm going to take this and go over to the serger and serge the exact same edge. I'm not going to change the camera view for just this, but I'm going to serge this exact same edge. Make sure you keep all of this pant out of the way, because this is when people put holes in their clothing. Okay, I just got done serging around my pocket. This should be a very even stitch. It should be about 1/4 of an inch away from the original stitch that I have. Then what I'm going to do, I could have done this earlier, but I didn't. That box that I sewed earlier, I'm going to make sure that it is pressed nice and flat. I'm going to make sure that those corners are nice and crisp. Make sure that your understitching is right there at the edge. You're not necessarily going to see that in the picture, but what I'll do is I'll grab a piece of paper and I'm going to slide it in here so that you can see what I just pressed. You can see that little square. I'm making it nice and crisp. You could have pressed this beforehand. In fact, you probably should have pressed this before you did all of that, but it's all right. Obviously, I waited until now, and it ended up just fine, just so long as it gets a press in the long run. So now what we're going to do is you can see how there's this little niche out, and then it gets straightened out right here, and that's because of the back portion of the pocket is filling that in. What I'm going to do now is go and serge from the top all the way to the bottom on this side seam. I'm going to do that with the side seam on the front. I'm also going to grab my back piece. Here's my back piece that corresponds with this, that gets laid on top of it like that. And I'm going to serge this edge as well. I'm going to serge both of those, and then I'm going to sew them together. Okay, I've gone ahead and serged this edge together. Make sure you're really careful not to catch any of the pocket. And I've serged the back piece, side seam as well, separately, because we want to go and press it open later. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these right sides together. I'm going to pin the top together. Make sure that I pin at each of the locations of my pocket. That'll make more sense later, why I care about those specific spots so much. Once I've gotten all that done, I'm going to come down and I'm going to pin the hem next. There's going to be a huge space there in the middle that I haven't pinned yet, and that's okay. What I wanted to do is identify the two end points and then make sure that this gets eased across the entire dimension. It should be a perfect fit because the pattern should work well with itself. But in case there's been some cutting errors or something, it's good to have a nice way to spread that out so you don't have any buildup as you're sewing. I'm going to start on this one. In this case, I'm starting at the hem. On the other leg, I would start at the top just because they're reversed from each other. And I like to have the back on top in this case. And it'll make sense as I get close to the pocket why I want to do that. But I'm sewing nice and steady at a 1/2 inch. Pause every once in a while, make sure that you're organized and everything's spaced properly. Take pins out as you go. Don't sew over the top of a pin. Sewing over the top of the pin can potentially damage the machine. Now, we're approaching the pocket. Make sure that the pocket is back up underneath. And it's all nice and smooth so you don't accidentally catch something you don't need to. And as I approach this spot right here, this is where my first edge of my pocket is. And if I pull it back, you can see that little corner. I want to know where that corner is because I want to make sure that I catch it exactly. I'm going to leave the needle down. And I'm going to take my hand underneath here and kind of pull the rest of the pocket back out of the way so that as I stitch through this area, I don't accidentally catch the edge of my pocket at all. She just did something funky, so make sure that it has good traction. Okay, as I approach the top, I can feel in there to make sure that I'm not catching the pocket. But I can approach the top and I know where that other corner is. It's right there. I want to make sure that my stitching takes me right to that corner as well. And then sew the rest of the way to the top. So that when I open this up, my pocket is inside this nice little line right here. You shouldn't really be able to see it all that much. And it can be really disguised so that when you pull it back, you can see that nice little row of understitching, but it just sort of disappears. Now I'm going to take this over to the ironing board and press it. The other thing is I'm going to finish the other leg off camera and press it and get it to this point so that I can show you how to move on to the next step. Okay, here I am. I'm going to press this open. Just finished sewing everything. I'm going to press it open so that it embeds those stitches nicely. Just makes it look nice and clean. Blast it with steam every once in a while. Do that to both legs. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to go over to the serger. And I'm going to serge the front rise by itself, the back rise by itself, and I'm going to do that for this leg, and I'm going to do it for the other leg. And then I'll meet you back here to put them together. Alright, I have serged the front and the back on both right leg and left leg. Now I'm going to place these right sides together And I'm going to go over and use the straight stitch machine to sew at a 1/2 inch here on the front and the back rise, just like that. Okay, I'm sewing the back rise and the front rise together. Go ahead and pin. At a 1/2 inch. You can hear people mowing the lawn outside. Sorry about the background noise, just consider it ASMR, I suppose. And you can hear the wood stop downstairs, so, you know, lots of fun background noises today. Understand in some of my other videos there's crickets chirping, so, you know, I believe in background noises. I'm doing the same thing to the front rise, sewing it together at 1/2 inch. Always remember to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Now I'm going to go over and I am going to press the front open and the back open. I'm going to do that off camera, but I will start filming again once I get to the serger, because I'm now going to serge the entire inseam all at one go. And as I serge, I'm going to make sure that the front rise and the back rise are pressed open right there, so that there's not very much bulk. But I can make yeah, so press it open and then serge all of the inseams. All right, I have now pressed open the front and the back. I'm checking to make sure it's not too fuzzy. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the hem of one of the legs. Give myself a little bit more light. Not so much light that it gives a glare for you. Start at the hem, and I'm going to serge all the way through from one hem through the crotch to the other hem. Notice I'm not really trimming any of the fabric off. But when I get to the crotch, make sure that it is pressed open as it goes underneath the foot and gets serged, so that it is held open. Make sure that's not catching exactly everything. Woo! Okay, everyone, feel sick for a second. I'm going to do that to this side, and I'm also going to serge the other side the exact same way. Trim off your threads, and we will go and straight stitch that together. So I have finished serging both of my inseams, and I've gone all the way through the crotch, and I've made sure that I've pressed them completely open on both sides. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin the crotch together, making sure it's perfectly lined up. I'm going to pin both of the ends, both of my hems, in a couple spots throughout the inseam, and then I'm going to sew them together at 1/2 inch. from one side all the way to the other. Once I'm done with that, I can start worrying about the waistband. So I'm going to sew these together now at 1/2 inch. When you get to the crotch, make sure that underneath and on top, both of the seams are pressed open. And sew to the end of the hem. Once you have sewn the inseam, go over to your iron and press this open. And then we can go ahead and start the waistband. I'm going to start sewing my waistband together. You might need to check the width here depending on which elastic that you get and resize it. I'm going to be using 2-inch elastic, so mine happens to measure 1/2 inch for seam allowance, 2 inches, 2 inches, 1/2 inch for seam allowance, so it's 5 inches across for mine. A lot of your patterns will be in 2, which means go ahead and put the front and back together, right sides together, and sew the edge here and sew the edge here, so it's one long tube. I'm going to go ahead and sew mine together right here. And this is going to represent my center back. And I'm just going to put them in here and sew it at 1/2 inch. One note, if you are planning on sticking in a drawstring, figure out where your center front is, and perhaps don't do the seam yet. You're going to want to use it so your everything's perfectly flat. What you're going to end up needing to do is figure out where your center front is. So if this is my center front, you're going to need to figure out when it gets folded in half, at center front, about 1/2 inch this way and 1/2 inch this way from center front. Midway down, you're going to need to put some buttonholes right there. So you can go ahead and put those buttonholes in right now. That way it's all prepped for putting in the elastic and everything. You're still going to put the elastic in, but because it's nice to have an elastic on top of the drawstring. But go ahead and put in your buttonholes so the drawstring can go through right now, or grommets. You could put grommets in there as well. Just remember, you've got 1/2 inch seam allowance, so once you take away 1/2 inch seam allowance, you're probably going to want to find the center point right there. So mine would be 1.5 inches up, 1 inch apart, centered on center front. And then I'd go to the buttonhole machine, or whatever machine you're going to use to do buttonholes or grommets or whatever, and put those in right now. Once I have got mine sewn together, I'm going to press this open, and then I'll be right back. Okay, I am ready to put together my waistband. So what I've done is I have pressed it in half. This is my center back seam, and what I'm going to do, you could start on the side seam if you've got two side seams, but in this case I turned my waistband into one long waistband rather than having two. And I'm going to take it over here and I'm going to sew it so that I have exactly maybe a little bit bigger, like maybe about 2 1/8 inch opening here. So I'm going to sew 1/2 inch up here so that I have a space of 2 inches in this area right here. But I'm probably going to err on the size of making it a little bit bigger than 2 inches just so that it's easy for me to slide in my elastic. To do that, I'm just going to do some quick measurements here. See if there's a spot I want to line this up that makes it a little bit easier for me. Yes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a little off of center back. And just sew this all the way around. If your fabric has a tendency to shift on you, you can certainly pin it, but this is just 100% cotton, so it's not going to do anything crazy. And I'm just creating a channel. Now I'm only showing you one method of doing this. I can think of at least 3 or 4 other ways to do this. I'm sewing this channel because I want the elastic to stay up here and I want my seam allowance not to have any elastic in it, so that I can reduce bulk when I go to my serge. Though there are methods where everything is encased and the elastic goes all the way down to the edge. Those are great too. I've done that way in the past. I think this is an easier method for individuals who are just starting to sew. So what I did was I went all the way around, but I started sewing here and I ended sewing here. So I left about a 2 inch gap, which will allow me to take my elastic and slide it inside pretty easily. But in order to slide it inside and make this whole process a lot easier, I'm going to stick a safety pin on here so I have something hard. The measurement of your elastic, go ahead and take your waist measurement and subtract like 2 or 3 inches off of it, or wrap the elastic around you and cinch it until you are like, yeah, this is how tight I want my elastic to be. And then go ahead and give yourself an additional inch or 2 inches so that you can overlap them and sew them together. So this is going to end up being 20 inches when it's done. It currently measures 22 because I have that overlapping by 2 inches for a seam allowance there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, slide it inside, and start feeding the elastic all the way around. Make sure you don't accidentally suck this inside as well. So once it gets a little bit closer, I'm going to pin it so that it won't suck inside the waistband as well. Try and keep the elastic fairly flat as you pull it around. I mean, you can reorganize it later, but it's kind of a pain to do that. So it has come around all the way. I'm going to take this safety pin off, and I'm actually just going to attach these two together really quick with the safety pin. But I haven't spent it because I haven't spent any time reorganizing everything, so I'm going to pull this so everything gets sucked inside, and it's all well distributed inside. Just keep on pulling it and distributing that elastic throughout. If you can feel the elastic folded up in there, then unfold it. Right about here, it's starting to lay pretty nicely, so I'm going to start just pinning it so it doesn't twist on me anymore. couple of spots that can help work it through. Once you've got everything fairly well distributed and you know that your elastic is not twisted, you can go ahead and overlap those two edges by the amount of overlap that you've given yourself. I've given myself 2 inches. I'm just going to make sure that that's 2 inches overlap. And plop that down on the machine, and I'm going to form an X with it. Just going to sew down about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. I'm going to backstitch. About 1/4 of an inch away from the edge there. I'm going to pivot and rotate at 1/4 of an inch. So I'm not too close to the edge. This isn't going to be seen, so if it's not, perfect square or something, you're okay. But I'm just forming this square. And then I'm going diagonal. Once you're done with that square and that diagonal, you are good to go as far as letting the elastic suck up inside of the waistband without it being a concern that you're going to lose the ends, because they're attached to each other now. It's all good. It can just be reorganized. And then just spend a whole bunch of time making sure that the fabric is distributed all the way around on the elastic so that those gathers that it's forming look good. Right here, where we let our elastic go inside, I'm going to come and sew at my 1/2 inch to really sandwich that in there and encase it. I made sure that I didn't catch the elastic in that so that I can still redistribute fabric through that section so that it can still suck in during that area. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to do some stitching. I'm going to do a stitch line right here, probably 1/4 inch down, probably 1/4 inch up, and then probably 1/2 inch away from that. So I'm going to do several different stitches there. If you have gotten buttonholes for a drawstring, make sure that you leave space between the 2 center stitches so that there's room for your drawstring to go get pulled through, and so that you don't accidentally sew on top of your buttonholes. But go ahead and just make sure that everything's nice and well distributed. As you sew these lines, what you're going to make sure that you do is that you pull everything perfectly flat as it goes around. Because if I don't pull and I just sew on top of all of these gathers, when I go to stretch it, it will snap all the threads. So we need to sew the elastic here in a stretched out form. I am going to go in and do a couple of pins before I do that. One at the back, stretch it all out, find my center front, and then we'll go from there. Once you have distributed the waistband evenly throughout and you know that the elastic inside isn't twisted, I'm just going to pin at a couple spots. I've pinned at my quarters. And then I'm going to find the center back. Slide this in the machine and get my first spot decided where I'm going to do a top stitch. Do a quick little back stitch. And with the needle down, I'm going to get myself prepped. I'm going to stretch the area that I'm going to sew next. I'm going to try and keep this tension in place as I sew. And I'm going to let the feed dogs in the machine determine how fast I'm going through and pulling it through the machine. As you go, take out the next pin, every time you are moving to the next section, leave the needle down so that you can reorganize everything, and then go to the next section. Stretch that out. It'll be kind of hard not to try and want to pull it through yourself, so that's just something you need to be aware of. Once your stitches match up, do a quick back stitch at the end. At least the first line of stitching is in place. And it should, if I've well distributed everything, should be fairly evenly scrunched all the way around. I'm going to do that again. I think I'm going to do it, because I'm not doing a drawstring, I'm going to have one happen. This one was at a 1/2 inch. I'm going to do another one at a 1/2 inch, and I'll do another one at a 1/2 inch. I'm just going to do that all the way around. So I'm going to find the back. Quick back stitch, and it'll be easier this time because I've already had it distributed once. Back stitch when you hit the end. And one more time. Find where that center back is. The fact that I can't find it very quickly is actually probably a good thing, because it means that it's hidden pretty well. And there you go. My waistband is complete, and it is ready for me to stick onto the pair of pants. So I'm going to grab the pants, and I am going to turn them inside out. Because it will be easier to take this smaller, it's the same size, but it's been scrunched down. It's going to be easier though if it's sitting on the inside. So I'm going to find the back. So here's my center back. I'm also going to find my center back on my waistband. I'm going to line those up together. If you were to have the two-piece waistband and you had the side seams, you would be lining up your side seams instead of your center back. You'd ultimately line that up as well, but you're going to find your center front as well. You can do that by just folding your waistband in half, center back on one side, and where it creases on the other side, that is your center front. So I can line that up and pin it into place with my center front on my pant. And I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to I'll stretch it out and find the quarter so that I can pin my sides, and then I'll pin a couple other spots as well. It'll be easier for me to do that off camera against my knee, so I'm going to do that here. Okay, once I have it pinned, I'm going to start at the back. Make sure that your center back seam is pressed open. And I'll end up stitching right on top of another line of stitching on the waistband, because that initial tube that I sewed is going to be hitting right at that 1/2 inch as well. I'll leave my needle down so that I can start stretching my waistband. Once that's all in place, everything's stretched, ready to go, I'm going to sew straight down that line of stitching, connecting my waistband to the pant. Make sure as you go that they are lining up really well. Make sure that your side seam is pressed open. We're going to head, or just whatever seam you happen to be going over is pressed open. You can certainly pin a lot more than I did. I've only pinned 4 spots, but the more you pin, the more likely you'll know that it's going to line up exactly the way you want it to. Didn't have my needle down quite as well that time. Doing that all the way around the outside. Tie a knot at the end of it. Trim all your threads. This is a good time to look around and make sure that nothing got caught. The weird puckery things. You want everything to just be nice and evenly tucked in. And I'm going to take this and do the exact same thing over on the serger. So I'm going to take this over to the serger and serge this edge. So I just finished serging right here. Got it all connected. The next thing I'm going to do is just make sure you get rid of any of the random threads that might be hanging out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these, slide them onto an ironing board like this, so it stretches the waistband out a little bit. But not because it's stretching it major. I don't want it all the way stretched out. I'm just a little bit so that I can put some tension on this seam so I can come in and just blast it with some steam. It's going to encourage it to lay flat and down. It's going to kind of flatten out a little bit of this ruching as well, so that when it all comes together, it looks nice and compact. So hopefully you can see that. It is a little bit, anyhow. But on the inside, it should look like that. The outside, it should look like that. This is a women's double extra small or something like that. It's fairly teeny, but anyhow, there's the waistband. The next step that we need to worry about is the hem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this inside out. I'm going to start doing is for the hem, you might want to try them on at this point and make sure that, and hem it to the length that you actually want it to. So some trimming could occur, or you might end up deciding to make a narrower hem. But what I'm going to do is first go around and press this over 1/2 inch. If you need to use a measuring tape, it's great, just so long as that's 1/2 inch. Go all the way around. If you have one of these boards, that's narrow, it makes life a little bit easier. Going all the way around, pressing under. Half an inch. Once I've gone around and everything's pressed to 1/2 inch, I'm going to go around and press it to a 1 inch. Go ahead and grab a ruler for this. Make sure though that you're being super, super, super careful about not letting get this if it's a plastic ruler like this, don't let it get close to your iron. It will melt it. Every once in a while, just go in and make sure that you measure it. Measuring it only every once in a while is okay, because usually if you pull it tight, it'll end up evening itself out. All the way around. So this is going to take up 1.5 inches of length. So if you are trying to make sure that you have the correct amount of length, when you try them on with just the raw edge hanging out down at the bottom, wherever you mark, make sure that you have 1.5 inches extra on the bottom so that you can do this hem. Having a full inch on the hem is nice because it gives some weight to the hem. It'll help pull the pant down as you wear it. So do that to this leg, and I'm going to do it to this other leg as well, and then I'm going to go over and sew it. Okay, I'm getting ready to sew the hem. So I've turned my garment right side out again so that when I sew the hem, I'm looking on the inside right here, but then I can also see everything that needs to get sewn. If I were to have left it inside out, I'd been sewing like this and potentially accidentally caught the edge. So this way I can actually see everything that I'm doing. So I'm going to start at my side seam. Or not at my side seam, on my inseam, because we want to have the knot in the most inconspicuous place. I'm going to line it up here so that I am sewing 1/16 of an inch away from the edge right here. If there's any extra little thread popping out, tuck them away. But yeah, I want to be sewing at 1/16 of an inch away from the edge. I'm just going to sew all the way around the edge, just like that. If you need to pin it a couple times, that's totally fine. Make sure your side seam and inseam are both pressed open, and that this seam right here matches up right there. So all the way around. Do a quick back stitch. Trim my threads. Do the other side, and I have a completed pair of PJs. And they look really great. I think I'll give them to my niece.